Bava Kamma Daf Zayin Amud Aleph. The Parasite, Nichale de lo listeri avde. Yegia kapecha ki toichel ashrecha v'tovla. King David teaches us that we are at our happiest and our most prosperous when we consume the efforts of our own hands, where we're not dependent on handouts, where we work for what we get and we enjoy what we get. That's when we are at our happiest and at our most prosperous. And that's something that is very foundational to the Jewish experience. We say every day in the benching after meals and in the tefillah for parnosa every day, we pray to Hashem, don't make me dependent on handouts from other people. It doesn't matter how big the handout is, and it doesn't matter how small my own efforts are. I would rather earn my living from my own efforts than from handouts. That's how the Jew thinks, that's how the Jew lives. A person would rather have one measure of his own work, the benefits of his own work, than 9 times as much of a handout, something to get from something else. We value that independence. We value that yegia kapecha ki toichel. And we'll see this playing out in the understanding of this piece of Gemara, where we have 2 case studies and 1 principle. The principle that we're dealing with is the principle we had back in Daf Chaf and Daf Chaf Aleph, which is Zeh nehne v'zeh lo chaser. What happens if I benefit from your property in a way that doesn't cost you anything? And we're not talking about whether I'm permitted to do so, whether I should do so. We're just talking about it. I did. It was raining and I took shelter in your house, in your building. And I stayed there for a while. Maybe I stayed there for a day or 2. It didn't cost you anything. Am I chayev? Do I have to pay you rental? Do I have to pay you anything else? And we had the halacha that it's potter. You don't have to pay for that. That's the law, the principle. The 2 case studies we're dealing with is number 1, hatokef ba'avdo shel chaviro v'asa bo mlacha. I kidnap your slave. Yesterday we talked about a case where I took a span of oxen and I worked with the oxen and I returned the oxen afterwards. Today we're dealing with I took your slave. I kidnapped your slave in the days when there was slavery, and I work the slave. I use the slave, and then I give him back to you. Am I chayiv? Do I have to pay you for the labor that the slave did for me? I'm using your asset. I'm using your slave to do that. And we have the din of Rav Daniel bar Rav Katina in the name of Rav. Hatokef ba'avdo shel chaviro v'asa bo melacha patur. No, you're patur for that. You don't have to pay for that. That's the 1 case study. The other case study is the one that I mentioned to you as an example of hadar b'chatzer chaviro shelo midato. If I live in your yard, I use your property without your permission, but it doesn't cost you anything, am I chayiv or not? And we say there also you're patur. And the Gemara says, but these 2 can't really be compared. These 2 cases can't really be compared, the Gemara suggests. Why? Because in the case of the house, there really isn't any cost to you. And you're okay with it, because the Gemara says there are various reasons, back on Daf Chaf Aleph as well, where it's preferable for a landlord to have his place occupied than to have it empty. There are all sorts of reasons why there's a benefit in having it occupied. So there's definitely no harm in the fact that I occupied your place, assuming your place is not out for rental. There's no loss of income. There's no damage. I'm just using your space. In such a case, I'm patur. So the Gemara says, I understand that. But in the case of Atokef v'avdo shel chaviro v'asa bo melacha, asks the Gemara, mi nichale de nichush avde? Is it in anybody's interests that his slave should be weakened through labor and he's not getting the benefit? If I tire my slave out because he's working for me, that's what a slave is for, or an employee works for me, I get the benefit from that. That's what it's for. That's what the arrangement is for. But that you use my slave without my permission, and you tiring out my slave, and I don't get the benefit, that's not where's that in my interest? So you can't compare these 2 cases. Answers the Gemara, no, even with slaves, it's a good thing for the owner. The law listeri avde. We're talking about a slave, as Rashi's explained. It's b'sha'ah she'einu ragil la'asot melacha, she'en achshav leba'alav melacha la'asot. Zeh nehne v'zeh ein chaser hu fatur. We're talking about a case where the slave is idle. The owner has no work for the slave. The owner is not using the slave. So the slave's sitting around there doing nothing. I come along and I employ the slave. I use the slave. Says the Gemara, it's actually in the owner's interest that the slave shouldn't stand idle, because idleness is something one can become addicted to. There was a time where it was taken for granted that if you had a job, you went to work. Then came COVID. And all of a sudden, people realized you can have a job without going to work. And now it's very difficult. It's years later, and the employers are still finding it very difficult to persuade employees to come back to work. Because it's good for a servant or an employee or a slave not to get used to the easy life. Because once you're used to the easy life, it's very difficult to go back to the hard life. So it's fine, it's in his interest to do so. That's the Gemara. No real problem with the Gemara, the problem's in the Rambam. So the Rambam brings these two halachot in Perik Gimel of Hilchot Gezele Va'aved. In halacha Zayin, he says the following: Hatokef avdo shechaviro v'asa bo melacha v'lo bitlo mimelacha acheret. If I kidnapped my friends, not kidnapped in the sense of violence, I borrow your slave without asking you, and I use him for work, and I'm not causing him not to do any other work, the slave is otherwise idle. Patur, you don't have to pay. Shenoach lo la'adam shelo yevatel avdo. What's the reason, says the Rambam? Because it's in the interests of the slave owner that his slave shouldn't be idle. Ve'im bitlo mimlacha acheret. But if he did cause him not to do other work which he would otherwise have done, mishalem lo kafol, you've got to pay what you would have paid for a worker. You've got the benefit of the work. So the reason the Rambam gives is the reason of the Gemara. A person wants his slave not to be idle. In halacha tet, now we have the other case of the property. I'm occupying the space of my friend without his permission. If this property was not out for rental, it was not an income-generating property, it was just standing empty, and I occupied it for that period of time, and we've got it now where there are lots of people who've been displaced from their homes in the south and in the north, and they're staying in homes of people who've got empty houses. There are many people we all know who've got empty properties, and they've allowed some of these people to use the space. Can you claim if the property was not out for rental, and assuming there's no damage done to it, they're just using the space, can you claim rental? No, nothing to claim. Even if this person would have had to hire a place somewhere else. So he's definitely benefiting. The occupier is saving rental. The landlord is losing nothing. Ask Rabbi Yoshua Soloveitchik in Rishimot Shiurim, the question is brought, why is the Rambam giving two different reasons? The Gemara has gone through what we're really dealing with, is the case of the Gemara had a question, but the slave is not, there is a cost to using the slave because the slave gets weakened. Says the Gemara, no, but there's a benefit in that cost as well, so it kind of it evens out. Why does the Rambam give two completely different reasons? In the case of the property, he says the reason is I'm benefiting, you're not losing anything. And in the case of the slave, he says the reason is that it's in the interest, it's in the interest of a person that his slave shouldn't be idle. Why doesn't the Rambam say the same reason? From a net perspective, there is benefit without cost. So why should it not be patur? So to understand that, I want to suggest that we refer back to Tosfos on Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph. There was a small Tosfos. We're talking about a case there where there's an estate that belongs to orphans, and this estate is a rubbish heap. It's not used. It's just a site that's not used for anything. People are dumping their garbage there. It's a useless site. And somebody puts up a house there. Somebody puts up a shack on his house, on his property. And in that case, the Gemara says he's chayiv. He has to pay for the rental of the space on which the house is built. Why, says the Gemara? Because we're talking in a case there where there actually were people using that property and paying a very small rental. So let us say that the value of the rental for the house that this new occupier put up, let's say, is $1,000 a month. The value that the landlord was getting from this occupier, this homeless person who put a little shack up on the garbage heap and used to pay the owner $50 a month. So I'm causing you a loss of $50 a month because now I've put up my house there and I've chased away the homeless person. And I'm getting benefit of $1,000 a month, but you're only losing $50 a month. Says the Gemara, you have to pay for the full $1,000 a month. Explains Tosfos, if I'm causing you even a little loss, you've got to pay for the whole thing. So nehena only works if there's no loss at all. If there's any loss to the other person, then I have to pay the full value of my hana'ah, which is strange in Hilchot Nezikin, because in most cases of Nezikin, what are we talking about? Whether it's theft or whether it's damages, I pay what I damaged you. I pay the loss I caused you. Here I'm causing you a loss of $50 and I'm paying you $1,000. Why is that? So we need to understand the principle back on Daf Chaf Aleph in order to understand the Rambam here. And what I would suggest is the following. A new understanding of nehena v'zeh chasar. Now this is a huge sugya. We've got it here, we've got it in Daf Chaf Aleph, we've got it in two Daf time again. We've got it all over Nezikin, and there's a fortune that's been written on the topic. But this understanding, this insight will help. If anybody's going into the sugya in depth, it will help. Let's redefine nehena v'zeh chasar. Based on that Tosfos, based on Chaf Aleph, that means if I cause you no loss, I don't have to pay you anything. I haven't damaged you. And yes, I've benefited, but I haven't really benefited from you. I've had benefit, but not directly from you. It didn't cost you anything. It would be from you if you invested in my benefit, if you paid for my benefit. But if you didn't pay anything for my benefit, then it's not really benefit from you. But if my benefit comes at a cost to you, even if it's a $50 cost and my benefit is $1,000, I couldn't have had my $1,000 benefit without you paying $50 for it. So who has paid for my benefit? You have. That's not my benefit. The benefit belongs to you. So it's a chidush, it's a new idea in nehena v'zeh chasar. That if the benefit is not mine, it doesn't belong to me. I have to pay for it. That's the idea of yegia kapecha ki tochel. It's got to be yours. So if it's not that I've got to compensate you for what it cost you. I've got to buy my benefit from you because the benefit isn't mine. The fact that it only cost you $50, it's the same as a person in a store sells an item for $100. It only cost him $50. I don't pay him $50. I pay him the benefit. I couldn't get that item anywhere else for less than $100. So my benefit is $100. So I pay him $100. I'm buying the article from him. It's almost as if nehena v'zeh chasar, when I'm causing you a loss, it's almost as if I need to buy my benefit from you because the benefit belongs to you and I'm stealing the benefit from you if I don't pay you. And it's true in normal cases of gzeila, we've learned that you've got to pay at the time what the thing was worth at the time of the theft. I've got to pay what the damage it caused you. But that's because of shinui koine and because ve'yishiv lo et ha'gzeila shegazal. There are various psukim in the Torah. But essentially, if I've got something that belongs to you, I've got to pay you for what I've got. Here I've got $1,000 a month benefit. That's what I've got. I've got free rental. I have to pay you for that rental. It's not good enough just to compensate you for what it cost you. That's the idea of nehena v'zeh chasar. So now if we go to our two case studies, if we go to the case of the slave, yes, I'm getting the benefit of the slave's labor, but is it costing you something? Yes, the Gemara says, mi nichale de lo nechash. I didn't want my slave weakened. It's true that I would rather have him employed. That's a different cheshbon. That means I'm moichel, that means I forgive it. And the Nebuchadnezzar Yosef says that the din of nehena v'zeh chasar has nothing to do with mechila. It's not that if I haven't caused you damage, you forgo the cost. Even if you don't forgo the cost, I don't have to pay you. I'm patur. You can't claim it from me. It's got nothing to do with forgoing. But in the case of the slave, it's about forgoing the cost. The owner of the slave says, yes, the labor you got from my employee, from my slave, really belongs to me because it cost me something. But you know what? I'm not going to charge you for it because I'm happy that my slave was working and wasn't sitting doing nothing. So it's a din in mechila, it's a din in foregoing. It's not a din in nehena v'zeh chasar because based on the Gemara on Daf Chaf Aleph, as explained by the Tosfos, this is not a case of nehena v'zeh chasar because my benefit of labor from the slave came at a cost to you. That's not the case of the house. In the case of the yard where I'm occupying your yard, I'm just occupying your space. Clearly, if I damage it, I have to pay for the damage. If I'm in your house and I break the window, I've got to repair the window. If I've dirtied the walls, I've got to repaint it. I've got to return it to you as it was. That's a different issue. But my occupying the space in itself is not at your cost. It doesn't cost you anything that I'm in an unoccupied space which you weren't renting out or using in any kind of way at all. That's completely intangible. I'm not occupying, there is no cost to you in that. Yes, there might be side costs, which is a different issue, but in my actual living there, there's no cost to you. And therefore, that's a case of zeh nehne v'zeh lo chaser. And that's why the Rambam says in the case of halacha tet, hadar b'chatzer chavero shelo midato, im oto chatzer en asuya l'schar, eino tzarich la'alot lo schar. Why? Shezeh nehne v'zeh lo chaser. In the case of the house, the din is zeh nehne v'zeh lo chaser. You'll say, but maybe he doesn't want somebody to be there. No, says the Gemara, people do want people occupying. They want the place occupied. They don't want the place standing empty. There's a benefit in that. But the real principle is zeh nehne v'zeh lo chaser. But we can't use the principle of zeh nehne v'zeh lo chaser for hatokef avdo shel chavero, for using somebody else's slave, because there my benefit comes at a cost, which means the benefit doesn't belong to me, it actually belongs to you, and I've got to buy the benefit back by paying for the amount of benefit. If it were not for the fact that the slave owner is mochel, he forgoes that, because he says to himself, I'm happy that my slave was being used and he was working and he wasn't sitting around doing nothing at all. That's the difference between the two Rambams, and with that we can answer the kasha of Rabbi Yoshua and many other difficult things in these sugyas. And from there we understand just this principle, this Jewish principle, not to want hana'ah, benefit which you haven't paid for. Not to want something which is not yours. Not to want something which you haven't earned. The value of everything I have is from my own effort. And that's responsible for Jewish entrepreneurship, and that's responsible for Jewish independence, and for not living on handouts. And when Jewish communities get to new places around the world, the first thing they do is they build their own infrastructure and they build their own schools. They don't start off with benefits. What are the benefits? What are the handouts? What's the social security? That's not where the Jew starts. The Jew starts with, what do I need to build here so as to become independent and to be able to have my own source of income, my own source of infrastructure. That's what the Jewish people do, and we see that back to the very beginning of the Masechta, Rav Yehuda's comment of "Man de boy lemevi chasida." If you want to be a chassid, if you want to be a righteous person, yasek b'milidin azikin, learn these things, because here you understand the essence of what the Jewish soul is. And in this case, about independent hanoah, about being the owner of that which you benefit from and not receiving a handout.